Hello, everyone. So this week we are doing the Learning Sciences and Constructivism, which is Chapter 10 out of Book Book. Just one chapter this week. Yay! So objectives are to be able to define learning sciences and the basic assumptions of this field, to explain the different perspectives on constructivism as a theory of learning and teaching, to identify the common elements in most contemporary constructivist theories, to apply the constructivist principle of collaboration to classroom practice, to apply constructivist principle of cooperation to classroom practice, and to evaluate the use of community-based activities / service learning. Actually, we don't need that one. To describe the 5 elements of student-centered teaching and to describe the dilemmas associated with constructivism in the classroom. So let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 objectives for this unit. So let's start with our very first learning objectives, to define learning sciences and the basic assumptions of this field. So the basic assumption here is that we can apply scientific understanding to instruction. So that's the underlying assumption. Learning sciences are interdisciplinary and they apply scientific understanding to the design, creation of learning innovations and instructional methods. The subjects that include or make up the learning sciences are psychology, biology, anthropology, and archaeology, biology/zoology, linguistics, computer science, and artificial intelligence. Okay. So we are going to start with a very simple comparison of the traditional approach versus deeper learning, which would be our first foray into this idea of constructivism. So constructivism is attached to this idea of deeper learning. Now, the traditional approach, also known as back to basics, conventional education, or customary education, in this method, we focus more on rote learning and memorization. So it tends to be a classroom where there is presentation of knowledge, and that is the knowledge that we need to learn. That's a traditional approach, and most of us have been in classrooms where that is the case. And in fact, at the University of Iowa, anytime you step into one of those large lecture halls, this is the approach that's going on. So you're taking Gen Chem, and this is what you need to know about general chemistry. Okay, they tell you what you need to know, and you learn it. That's what it is. So in the traditional approach, there are objective educational standards based on testing. So we think that there are these standards that everybody should meet, and if we don't, then somehow that indicates that students and or the educational system is failing. So some examples of that type of testing would be the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, the ACT or the SAT, etc. So it's this idea that everybody should be able to hit these certain standards. There are different levels of attainment, and as we have discussed previously, there are tied to this, or a part of this whole package, is now the Common Core. Okay, so the Common Core has some problems in being so immersed in this traditional approach. So the problems that we found with the Common Core before are now going to become more pronounced as we move through this material. Don't worry too much about that, just more an aside. So traditional approach versus the deeper learning approach. With deeper learning, we have the delivery of a layered, interesting content to students in ways that allow them to learn and then apply what they have learned. The students are engaged and interested. They're more interested in broader, we are more interested in broader applications of knowledge and how it is created. So an example of deeper learning would be where there's an after after-school program where students are encouraged to create a robot. Okay? So it's this idea of hands-on, interesting topics, and most often we see this kind of application in after-school programs versus a typical classroom on a typical day in a typical American school system. So with this type of deeper learning, transfer is the primary objective. And so I'm going to spend a minute here just to talk about this idea of transfer. Transfer is the idea that you can develop knowledge in one area and then use it somewhere else. So it's a little bit like Piaget's formal operations, right? So I have knowledge, and then, oh, I'm going to take that skill, that knowledge, and I'm going to use it over here. So really, as instructors, as teachers, as students, that's what we want. We want to be able to take what we've learned in geometry and use it in real life. But what happens a lot is that students learn it in one context, and then they're not able to use it somewhere else. So there tends to be disconnect between what we are taught and what we use in real world situations. And so deeper learning tries to work on making those connections happen. So with deeper learning, transfer is the primary objective, which requires more than just knowledge of the facts. It requires pragmatic knowledge. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do, and I should have mentioned this earlier, so I really encourage you for this unit in particular, but for all units in general, to print the PowerPoint before you start listening to my lecture. It just gives you a place to write down some of your thoughts and some additional information that I may be imparting to you. In this lecture in particular, I have things where I'm asking you to think. So it's really important that you have a place to jot them down. And for me, it's easier, I think that it's easier for me to remember things if I have a visual in my hand that's the same as what is being shown to me on the computer monitor. So I jot it down on the same spot or visual space that I have in my hand. Hopefully that makes some sense to you. I'm not sure that that's true for everybody, but I think it probably is pretty close to true for everybody, but it's an individual difference. But my suggestion would be is if you haven't printed these PowerPoints in the past, or you haven't printed it for this one, that you do so now. You can pause the video and then come back. All right, so let's deal with this traditional classroom or deeper learning approach slide. So these are just examples of questions that might be posed in a classroom. So my request of you is that you decide whether or not the question is a traditional classroom approach or a deeper learning approach. And then I will go through the answers in the next slide. Okay, so how many of you have wondered why it is so easy to remember some things but not others? When have you wondered about this? Memory is an active system that stores, organizes, alters, and recovers or retrieves information. The definition of metacognition is awareness and understanding of one's own thought processes. Why is metacognition important to understand if we want to teach students to learn? How does Woolfolk define procedural memory? Who can give me an instance of learning how to do something simply by doing it over and over again? Psychologists categorize episodic memory as explicit. Memory, in fact, all of psychology, is not completely understood. What are some examples of episodic memory that could be considered explicit? What are some that could be considered implicit? Okay, so here are my answers. The first one, how many of you have wondered why it is so easy to remember some things but not others? That would be deeper learning. Memory is an active system that stores, organizes, alters, and recovers. It's traditional classroom, so it's a set defined, right? It is a classic example of definition, right? And so we can see then that the definition of metacognition is awareness and understanding would be traditional classroom. So one definition, this is it, and this is what you should know. That's traditional classroom approach. The fourth question, why is metacognition important to understand if we want to teach students to learn? That's deeper learning. That's probing students, getting them to think about the question that's being posed and the information that's being presented. How does Woolfolk define procedural memory? So again, there's a set definition, there's an expert, that person's definition is the one we want to remember. That's the traditional classroom approach. Who can give me an instance of learning how to do something simply by doing it over and over again? That would be deeper learning. Again, it's this idea of probing. Oops, sorry about that. Then we have psychologists categorize episodic memory as explicit. That would be traditional classroom approach, as opposed to this one, which is similar type of material, but it's a deeper learning approach. Memory, in fact, all of psychology is not completely understood. What are some examples of episodic memory that could be considered explicit? What are some that could be considered implicit? And so that would be deeper learning. And what we should be considering here, in addition to just, and I'm going to muddy up your waters a little bit here, in addition to just thinking about deeper learning versus traditional classroom approaches, is that individual students have preferences for one or the other. So some students seem to be very, very comfortable with having set answers. So if they like to work through, so this is not exclusive, but they like to perhaps work through math problems because there's a set answer. There's a way to do it, and this is how you do it, and I get this answer, boom, done. As opposed to some of us who are drawn to questions that don't have set answers. So we're more interested in how things develop. And so there can be, and I'm going to make the example of a student being drawn to maybe the social sciences, to being drawn to psychology, for example. They would want to understand how different people react to the same situation. There's no set answer, although there's definitely some explicit knowledge in all fields. Okay, so but what I want you to take away from this slide, again, is this idea that there are deeper learning approaches and there are traditional classroom approaches to learning. Okay, so central ideas of constructivism, and there are two. One is that learners are active in constructing their own knowledge. And so I would ask you, do you agree with that statement or disagree with it, and why? So think about this for yourself. Do you make your own knowledge? Do you help yourself remember things? Do you help yourself understand things? And you may be at a point in your lives where this is not something that you've thought a lot about, but as you go further into your higher educational career, you'll be thinking more and more about this. So how do I learn what I need to learn? How do I make it meaningful for myself? So I remember being 18 or 19 and really only being interested in a few things. I wasn't interested in math and science, and so I didn't spend a lot of time on those topics. So I'm average in those topics. It was just something that I wasn't drawn to, but I never spent a lot of time thinking about how to attain that knowledge or how other people attain it. And now I find it deeply interesting. When I meet somebody that is involved in those fields, I'm always asking, well, who got you interested in math? I had a fellow student in a seminar class on teaching in higher ed who was studying to be a math professor. She just loved patterns and numbers, and it was really interesting to hear her talk about how that developed for her over time. So then my question My question to you is, do you agree or disagree with the statement that learners are active in constructing their own knowledge? And the second central idea of constructivism is that social interactions are important in this knowledge process. Do you agree or disagree, and why? So let me ask you this. What is this an example of? What kind of metacognitive strategy is being used? So obviously it's mapping. Okay, remember, we just covered this, mapping and comprehension. And what about the central text on the page? It is organizational chart, organizing and remembering. But we also have self-questioning and cognitive monitoring. So all I'm asking here is I'm trying to help you bridge some of the material that we've already covered to material that we're currently covering. What you need to know from this unit is that there are two central ideas of constructivism. So there are three types of constructivism. First type is psychological individual / cognitive constructivism. And this is the belief that individuals make or construct their own knowledge. It's their interpretation of their own experiences in particular situations. So everyone creates their own knowledge. So here's an example. A student interprets a teacher's refusal to let them have a hall pass as unfair, even biased or prejudicial. So what kinds of experiences might have led them to believe that? Right? So think about somebody who's a minority or somebody that comes from a lower socioeconomic status. What might lead them to believe that being denied the hall pass is unfair? And then as an instructor, what could you do to redirect that student's thinking? What would you want them to think? Certainly, we wouldn't want anybody to feel that we are being prejudicial. In fact, we wouldn't want to be prejudicial. It's our job not to be. Okay, so Vygotsky's social constructivism is another type of constructivism. And within this, learners participate in a range of activities with others and appropriate. They use reasons, actions, and participation to develop outcomes. So here's an example. The college student is able to understand the current philosophy that is being studied when it is discussed in class, but struggles on his own. The professor works with the student to help him learn how to approach the philosophy book and how to consider the right questions to ask himself while reading alone. So we have an interaction. We have an interaction between the student and the professor who is working in the student zone of proximal development. But here's another question to ask yourself. What type of metacognition is the professor helping the student discover? So if you can't remember, I will tell you that he is helping the student develop self-regulated learning. All right, and then we have constructionism, not constructivism, constructionism. And there's a lot of people that study constructionism or in this field, they don't want to be confused. The big tool of constructivism, even though they're part of it. So there's a lot of confusion over this area. The way to keep it straight, the easiest distinction to make is that with constructionism, you are going to see some employment of technology. So constructionism challenges traditional views or paradigms while inviting collaboration. Typically, you'll see this view among those who advocate for technology or flipped classrooms. Flipped classrooms would be where you have students presented with material. Let's say they view a lecture. They view the lecture online, and then they come to class and they work on some assignment. And so they've already gotten the overview, and then they're working on the details of actually employing it. The great thing about a flipped classroom is that students can take advantage of the expertise of their instructor while they're actually working to attain the knowledge. So as opposed to the traditional classroom where we're presented with the knowledge and then sent home with the homework, and we get home and we try to do the geometry problem and we realize we don't remember anything that we were taught, and there's no one there to help us, this flips it. Okay, so that's the idea of the flipped classroom. And constructionism, again, is tied to technology. So typically we would have a video or some other, you could have an audio, but in this day and age, video is so cheap and easy to do, why wouldn't you do that? So constructionism is student-centered discovery learning where students use information they already know to acquire more knowledge. That's the big thing. The big distinction that we need to make is that constructionism will employ technology. And so we can say there's no solid agreement within the types or perspectives of constructivism on how knowledge is created because, one, realities and truths of the external world influence knowledge construction. So what we experience, our truths as individuals influence what we construct, what knowledge we make. So good example is our student with the hall pass. Okay, so based on their prior experiences, people judge them based on color or economic status. Also, internal processes such as organization and assimilation influence knowledge construction. So what we already know helps us develop greater understanding. For example, and this is actually an example from last fall, I had a student, Patrick, who was saying, yeah, you know what, at first ed type exam, it's really hard, but I just got he got 95% on his biochemistry test. And I was asking him about it because I'm interested in how students learn and why are you interested in biochemistry? Although I stopped myself because I was thinking, actually, I'm interested in biochemistry for my own reasons because it's got a life element to it. But Patrick said he barely had to study for it, and the reason why is because he's so interested in it. He already knows a lot about this topic. So it wasn't that the professor did a great job, it was that Patrick already had the knowledge. So what we already know helps us develop a greater understanding. So the fact that he had this great, vast prior knowledge and experience to draw on made it really easy for him to learn the new material. Okay, and then the last reason why there's no solid agreement is that external and internal processes influence direct construction of knowledge. So in essence, every learner is different. So who we are, what we have experienced, what we have learned influences what we will learn, right? We can't be different than who we are. So it is important to know, right, that every student is an individual, and that's why we have 3 separate chapters on those types of topics. So it's very important from a psychological perspective that we respect those differences and try to work with them for students. Okay, so that being said, there are 3 different views on how knowledge is constructed. So it's external, is it constructed from an external direction, an internal direction, or both? And with the external direction, the assumption about learning and knowledge is that knowledge is acquired by constructing a representation of the outside world. So direct teaching, feedback, and explanation affect learning. Knowledge reflects the way things really are in the outside world. And so if we think back on that second slide where I showed you traditional classroom versus deeper learning. Traditional classroom is going to take this external direction point of view. So an example of this from the theories that we have been presented with within this course would be information processing. So this is how the brain works. So certainly information processing model is not nearly as complex as the human brain itself. But the idea is this is how it works. Okay. Hopefully that makes some sense. If not, send me an email. That's what I'm here for. Another belief or another belief on how knowledge is constructed is that it is from an internal direction. And the way the textbook defines the assumptions about learning and knowledge is that knowledge is constructed by transforming, organizing, and reorganizing prior knowledge. Knowledge is not a mirror of the external world, even though the experiences influence thinking and thinking influences knowledge. Exploration and discovery are more important than teaching. So an example of this is actually surprisingly Piaget. And I only say that because we tend to think about Piaget in terms of those stages. But if we think about the assimilation and accommodation that he is talking about, then we can see how this might mirror an internal direction. So it's something that we have within us, and we are assimilating and accommodating what's being brought in to what we already have. So this is an internal direction. We have to have it within ourselves. Okay, so as opposed to Piaget, we have Vygotsky. Should have warned you, they're going to keep coming up and up and up. Oh, I think I did. Okay, so the third type, though, of how, or third view of how knowledge is constructed is that it's both external and internal. So knowledge is formed from an external and internal direction. Knowledge is constructed based on social interactions and experience. Knowledge reflects the outside world as filtered through and influenced by culture, language, beliefs, interactions with others, direct teaching and modeling, guided discovery, teaching, models, and coaching, as well as the individual's prior knowledge, beliefs, and thinking affect learning. So it's the whole enchilada here. And if we think about the theories that we've been presented with, this is Vygotsky, right? And you can read, as I read through this, I just see a lot of what he had to say. And certainly you should be thinking about what we were presented with in chapter 2 about Vygotsky and how knowledge is constructed. So Vygotsky is both external and internal. By the way, I won't ask you about that. I am concerned that you have some understanding of the differences between external and internal, but I'm not going to ask you anything specifically about which theory applies to which. Okay, so let's talk about the elements of constructivist student-centered teaching. So student-centered teaching is just that. It is teaching based on what the student, based on the student. So another way of thinking about this is constructionism in the classroom. It should be constructivism. So there are 5 elements of constructivist student-centered teaching, and I'm going to call it the high 5 elements of constructivist student teaching. So there are 5 different elements. Kind of like a mnemonic, but not quite. So first element, embed learning in complex, realistic, and relevant learning environments. 2, to provide for social negotiation and shared responsibility as part of learning. 3, to support multiple perspectives and use multiple perspectives of content. 4, to nurture self-awareness and an understanding that knowledge is constructed. And then lastly, to encourage ownership in learning. All right, so the learning environment. The thumb. Students should encounter fuzzy, ill-structured problems. They should encounter complex learning environments. Problems should be based in real-world situations. What is an example of this that we have seen today? What is one from your past? So my example from my past is in 7th or 8th grade, we had to build a bridge, a model bridge. Nobody gave us directions. Nobody even told us what bridge we were supposed to use. So I tried to build a bridge that was on my grandfather's farm. Right? So I created this model and moderately successful. But other students built other bridges, and it certainly taught us a lot about how bridges put together, even though it was a model. But moving on, so 2, to provide for social negotiation and shared responsibilities. And this is your index in our high 5. This is the index. Students should be able to defend their own perspectives. So it is basically saying that everybody has a right to their perspective, right? So not saying, oh no, Tony, you can't think like that. I'm not judging you based on color. Well, it's basically to make that kind of statement, you are denying the student, Tony, and his experiences, right? So you're downplaying what he's actually experienced of life, and he is going to feel completely invalidated, disregarded, and marginalized. Right? So you would basically put him in a position where you're asking him to deny his truth. Think about how that would make you feel as an individual. So, in providing for social negotiation and shared responsibility, respect for other perspectives and students should be shown. So we want a model that is appropriate to think about other people's perspectives, but also encourage students to show respect for the other students in the classroom. So what is an example of this that we have seen today? What is one from your past? So in posing these questions, to help you become more self-reflective. Okay. So the third element in our high 5 is to support multiple perspectives, and this is the middle finger. It is a way to avoid oversimplification, to provide different perspectives, analogies, and metaphors. And it is also a way for you to connect better with different students. What is an example of this that we have seen today or talked about today? What is one from your past? 4, nurture self-awareness and knowledge construction. Put an emphasis on the student role in construction of knowledge. Help them identify and understand what they already know. What do you know? What do you want to know? What have you learned? Right? Help them identify and understand. So what is an example of this that we have seen today? What is one from your past? And then 5, encourage ownership in learning. Oh, thank you. Student efforts are central to learning. It is a major shift from the student being the vessel into which knowledge is imparted. So I will say that this is a common metaphor for traditional classroom approach, where I am the expert and I dump that all on you as the learner. You imbibe it, you hold it, you're the vessel. So what is an example of this that we have seen today? And then what is one from your past or one you plan to incorporate in your classroom? So student efforts are central to learning. It's not that we have all the knowledge and we give it to them, it's that the student actually makes the effort themselves. The next subject that we're going to cover are difficulties of constructivism in the classroom, and we're going to start by looking at some research that was done in middle school classroom, where we have two classrooms, one where there's kind of a mixed constructivist with traditional classroom approach, and one which is much more constructivist in their approach to teaching a lesson. And so the idea of the lesson was to create a pulley challenge. So already they're constructing something. It's a pulley challenge. So challenge implies that we are going to ask them to do something, a pulley challenge. They're going to make a pulley. So here's a description of Linda's classroom during the pulley challenge. So both examples are 9 days long. On the first day, the students participated in a brainstorming and question generation and a whole class discussion. On day 2, Linda introduced the pulley challenge, designed a cam lift device using pulleys to lift a bottle that weighed 600 grams using the least amount of effort. Demonstration of materials that could be used to build the pulley device. On days 3 and 4, a student used Compass to answer questions that Linda had generated in a handout. Okay, so Compass is a software that was created specifically for this research. On days 5 and 6, student groups used materials to build and test their pulley device. On day 7, there was a whole class discussion. Students were asked to report the amount of effort force required to lift the load and what they learned from the pulley challenge. On day 8, they completed the assignment of writing up their answers. And then on day 9, there was a quiz on pulleys. Okay, so very much sounds like probably some classrooms that we've been in. And this goes to Linda's class. We can now take a look at Jane's class. So same set number of days. On day 1, there was brainstorming about pulleys, prior knowledge and examples, and a whole class discussion. Jane introduced the pulley challenge, so she would do it on the first day. On day 2, students collaborated in groups to generate questions about pulleys to address the challenge. So as opposed to Linda's classroom, they're generating their own questions. Now Jane did help the groups come up with questions, but for the most part, they were on their own. On day 3, students used the materials to experiment with pulleys and examine the differences between fixed and movable pulleys and refine their questions. So think about that. Not only are they being asked to generate their own questions, so what questions do you have? But then they're being asked to refine it. Okay, so here's what you were thinking was going to happen. Here was a set of questions that you have. But now that you've started to play with it, maybe your questions have become more detailed, more succinct, more to the point, and more reliant on what you're actually experiencing. So in days 5, 6, and 7, the students used Compass to find information related to the challenge. Students built and tested their pulley device. So they're using the software while they're working. So this sounds more like a real world situation. So think about what you actually do on a typical day. Well, I guess I can't. I'm making some assumptions. But here's my life. So on a day-to-day basis, I use Google to learn tons of things. I even use Wikipedia, but don't tell anybody I said that. So I use the tools that I have around to help me learn. If there's something that I encounter while taking a course that maybe I did encounter in a prior course, but I don't remember it very well, I will use Google to go back. I will use Khan Academy to go back. What don't I remember? How can I learn that material better? What can I access? Literally, at my fingertips, I have access to all kinds of information. And so I can use that to incorporate it into my current learning. So these days, 5, 6, and 7 model more like what the world is in today's society. On day 8, there was a whole class discussion. Groups were asked to justify their reasoning for the setting of their pulley device, to report the amount of effort force required to lift the load, and what they learned from the pulley challenge. So not only at this point, not only do they learn in their group, but then they're showing the other classmates what they learned. So everybody's learning from each other. And then on day 9, there is a reflection, and students were asked to write about their Foley design and what they learned from it. And so I will say this, not only was Jane's approach more like what we would like to see with the constructivist classroom, the students that participated in her classroom actually did, or when presented with this survey, they felt that they had gained the most from the exercise. Okay, however, as I said, there are difficulties of constructivism in the classroom, and we can certainly feel that when you read Jane's description of what she said, it's not bad. It is pretty typical of what we see in a classroom. And it is an indication for all of you that it is difficult to actually implement this. So there are 4 types of dilemmas that happen with constructivism in the classroom. I didn't want to forget anything. So the 4 types of dilemmas are conceptual, pedagogical, cultural, and political dilemmas. And we're going to go through each one in turn. We're going to start with conceptual dilemmas. So conceptual dilemmas. So this is the problem, right? Teacher's dilemma, grasping the underpinnings of cognitive and social constructivism. So just not even understanding exactly what it is that we're supposed to be doing. And then reconciling current beliefs about pedagogy with the beliefs necessary to support a constructivist learning environment. So we can think back to the Linda example where, okay, she's gone to the Common Core. She believes that this is what these students should get out of this session. So they need to have learned this. So she gives them a set of questions that she developed to help them learn those things. And in doing so, she took a little bit away from their own construction of knowledge. So questions of concern, things that teachers should be thinking about when employing constructivism in the classroom is, what is suitable for me in my classroom? Will it work with what is being measured? Should the ideas of the experts be internalized, or should my students construct their own? So, second type of dilemma is a pedagogical dilemma. So we want to honor students' attempts to think for themselves while remaining faithful to accepted disciplinary ideas. So this is a wild example, but let's just say that the accepted disciplinary idea is that the world is flat. And you have a student that says, no, it's not. Oh, well, how are you going to deal with that? And we're probably not going to have those major kinds of shifts in thought, but we are going to encounter times where students' thinking is running at a counter to what we know to be true, and somehow we've got to guide their thinking towards the accepted belief. Okay? And that can be really tricky. So you don't want to do it in a way that's going to shut student down or make them feel like they're thinking ludicrous or crazy or unacceptable, because that's not true. It's just maybe something that they're lacking. So trying to dig deeper into their thinking and help them see where they're not quite aligning, right? So normally it's some kind of detail that's keeping them from really aligning well with what the current disciplinary ideas are. We want to help them develop deeper knowledge. We want to master facilitation. So we want to master the idea of we're helping them learn. We are working with them and their ZPD. And then managing new kinds of discourse and collaboration. So we want to help them work together, which is not easy. So questions of concern. Do I base my teaching on students' existing ideas rather than on learning objectives? What skills and strategies are necessary for me to become a facilitator? How do I manage a classroom where students are talking to each other and not me? Should I place limits on their construction? What type of assessments will capture the learning I want to foster? So there's a typo there. So what type of assessment will capture the learning I want to foster? The third type of dilemma is cultural dilemmas. So we want to be conscious of the culture of your classroom. So every situation where we have people brought together, typically we develop some kind of culture. So some way of acting and being in that environment. There are corporate cultures and there are classroom cultures. And a lot of that has to do with the instructor. So what you bring in and what you set as the culture of the classroom is what that classroom is going to be like. So if you are informal, your students will pick up on that. You'll have a somewhat informal classroom, and you should be comfortable with that, right? If you think it should be more formal, then that's something you're going to have to model and show, and place those restrictions in those detailed guides. So we want to question assumptions about what kind of activities should be valued. We want to take advantage of experiences, discourse patterns, and knowledge of students with varied cultural backgrounds. So you don't want to ignore the fact that you have a student from Mexico with this idea of cultural funds of knowledge. So we want to bring in what they have and really capitalize on it, not only for them, but for the other students. So, questions of concern. How can we contradict traditional efficient classroom routines that generate new agreements about what is valued and rewarded? How do my past experiences in the classroom prevent me from seeing new potentials? So what happens is we go through K through 12 and we are brought through in these traditional classrooms, and that's what is easiest to fall back on. And in fact, when you get out there and you do your student teaching, you'll still see a lot of this. And as somebody that will be coming in with some knowledge of constructivism, not only from this class, but from others that follow, you're going to want to change things. You're going to want to employ this, and you're going to see that there are some restrictions and how that can be used. And also that you yourself are going to want to fall back on some of the tools that you've seen, because it's easier. It's what you know. So it is a dilemma. How can I accommodate different roles that I use? So how do I use those cultural funds of knowledge? And then the last teacher's dilemma is political dilemmas. And this is essentially confronting issues of accountability with various stakeholders in the school community, negotiating with key others, the authority to support the teacher for understanding. So it's this idea that the common core is out there, the standards are out there, and how do I reconcile my desire to create a constructivist classroom with those kind of real pressures? So it is the job of the principal, it is the job of the school administration to ensure that all students are reaching a certain level of attainment. And so they are going to want to go back to tradition. They're going to have some desire to go back to traditional classroom approaches because it's what they're most comfortable with. And so somehow you have to negotiate this ground, right? So what I want and what I believe, what my teaching philosophy is, and trying to reconcile it with the outside world. The questions of concern are, how can I gain the support of administrators and parents for teaching in these new ways? Should I make use of approved curriculums that are insensitive? How can diverse problem-based experiences meet standards? And so what I'm trying to point you to is that we can't work without the Common Core. Common Core is, for all we know, here to stay, right? We have to assume that it is. And so we need to take the Common Core and kind of incorporate it with these ideas of constructivism. So they're not mutually exclusive, but we need to be thoughtful in how we present materials and what we do to try to get students interested. All right, that concludes my lecture on chapter 10. If you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you on the discussion board. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great day. Thanks a lot, you all. Sorry, not just guys.